Every year, students hear the same tired speech at the beginning of a Shakespeare unit. William Shakespeare wrote many plays and poems, acted in a theater troupe, and died on his birthday. He married Anne Hathaway and had 3 children. But that's about all we know for certain about Shakespeare, and even that has been called into question. There's a lot of mystery and myth surrounding Shakespeare's life and his death. Shakespeare's date of birth isn't certain, though most historians think it was April 23rd, the same day he died 52 years later. At least one of his plays has gone missing. His gravestone is inscribed with a curse, and aside from the names of his family members and where he was born, almost nothing is known as fact about Shakespeare. Experts actually disagree on whether Shakespeare wrote his plays or if another man wrote them using a pseudonym. Authorship is always going to be in dispute, since it was popular in Shakespeare's time to imitate or even outright copy a story and produce it yourself. This is why many of Shakespeare's plays were never rehearsed, with actors receiving their lines just before going on stage. Even though Shakespeare had to guard against plagiarists, he also drew heavily from other texts in his own work. In The Winter's Tale, the first 3 acts are drawn almost directly from a novel, Pandosto, published in 1588 by Robert Greene. It is uncertain when The Winter's Tale was first performed, but most critics believe the play was written in 1610 or 1611, during the reign of King James I. The first recorded performance of the play was on May 11, 1611. The Winter's Tale has been classified as a tragedy, a comedy, and a tragicomedy at different times. It has even been called a romance, a genre that Shakespeare didn't really explore. Now, many call the play one of Shakespeare's problem plays, which present a struggle and resolve it. The Winter's Tale is split into 2 parts. The first 3 acts are set in Sicily in the winter and have a tragic climax, while the last 2 acts take place in Bohemia, the modern-day Czech Republic, during the summer and end happily. I will be performing a section of The Winter's Tale from Act 3, Scene 2. Leontes, the jealous king of Sicily, believes his wife Hermione is sleeping with his best friend Polixenes, the king of Bohemia. He thinks that his baby daughter Perdita and his son Mamilius are illegitimate children of Polixenes. Camillo, a nobleman who is trusted by Leontes, does not believe this and trusts Hermione and Polixenes. So does Paulina, a noblewoman and Hermione's friend. Paulina's husband, Antigonus, is loyal to the king, and much less loyal to Hermione. In the second half of the play, a few new characters enter the story. Florizel, the son of Polixenes, is courting a shepherd's beautiful daughter. Autolycus, a thief and wanderer in Bohemia, helps the protagonist and befriends the people he steals from. When the play begins, King Leontes is sad to say goodbye to Polixenes, his best friend since they were young. Leontes knows Polixenes won't see him again for a long time, since they both are, surprisingly, busy ruling their kingdoms of Sicily and Bohemia. Leontes tries to convince his friend to stay a little while longer, pestering him constantly, but Polixenes still wants to go and rule his kingdom for some reason. At last, Leontes asks Hermione, the wise, beautiful queen, to convince Polixenes, which she does without breaking a sweat. Of course, that was never going to work out happily. Leontes is a very jealous man, and he goes a little bit nuts and convinces himself that his wife got his friend to stay because they're having an affair. Obviously. He decides, with zero evidence, that his young son and unborn child are actually Polixenes' children. Enraged, he orders Polixenes to be killed and Hermione imprisoned, but his friend Camillo refuses to kill Polixenes and instead runs away to Polixenes' kingdom with him. Hermione, meanwhile, is locked away without being allowed to see her son Mamilius. While in prison, she gives birth to a daughter. Her close friend Paulina takes the baby girl to Leontes in the hope that it will make him see how wrong he is, but this backfires horribly, and he orders Paulina's husband, Antigonus, to abandon the baby on a foreign beach. He does that, dropping her off and then being chased off stage to be killed and eaten by a bear a moment later while a sudden storm sinks his ship. A shepherd and his son find the baby and Antigonus' mangled corpse. Months later, Leontes finally allows Hermione to go on trial. After hearing the charges, Hermione speaks up in her own defense.
Since what I am to say must be but that which contradicts my accusation, and the testimony on my part no other but what comes from myself, it shall scarce boot me to say, not guilty. Mine integrity, being counted falsehood, shall, as I express it, be so received. But thus, if powers divine behold our human actions as they do, I doubt not then that innocence shall make false accusation blush, and tyranny tremble at patience. You, my lord, know best, who least will seem to do so. My past life hath been as continent, as chaste, as true, as I am now unhappy, which is more than history can pattern, though devised and played to take spectators. For behold me, a fellow of the royal bed, which, oh, a moiety of the throne, a great king's daughter, the mother to a hopeful prince, here standing to prate and talk of life and honor, for who please to come and hear. For life, I prize it, as I weigh grief, which I would spare. For honor, 'tis a derivative of me to mine, and only that I stand for. I appeal to your own conscience, sir, before Polixenes came to your court, how I was in your grace, and how merited to be so. Since he came, with what encounters so uncurrent I have strained to appear thus. If one jot beyond the bound of honor, or in act or will that way incline me, hardened be the hearts of all who hear me, and my nearest of kin cry fie upon my grave.
After Hermione's speech, the verdict sent by the Oracle of Apollo is read out. It states that Hermione is innocent, but Leontes decides that this is obviously wrong, and orders the trial to go on, just in time for a servant to rush in and announce that Mamillius has died. Hermione faints, and Paulina carries her away while Leontes regrets his accusations of infidelity. A big change of heart in about 10 seconds. Paulina returns and cries that the queen is dead. Leontes breaks down as Act 3 ends. In the transition between Acts 3 and 4, time appears to tell the audience that 16 years have passed while they watched, which is how you must be feeling right about now. In Bohemia, Polixenes and Camillo have become friends, but Camillo still wants to go home to Sicily. Polixenes changes the subject in the least subtle way ever and talks about his son Florizel. Florizel spends all his time at the home of some old shepherd, but Polixenes and Camillo know that the shepherd has a beautiful daughter, and figure that no teenage guy is going to hang out with an old shepherd. The king and Camillo disguise themselves to find out what Florizel is up to. When Polixenes and Camillo arrive at the shepherd's house, Florizel is with the Polixenes is ticked off that his son is in love with a shepherdess, and reveals himself dramatically, just as Florizel and Perdita are getting engaged. He bans Florizel from ever talking about Perdita again. When Polixenes leaves, Florizel tells Perdita that he wants to run away with her. Camillo comes up with a plan and sends Florizel and Perdita to Sicily, hoping that the king will follow them and take Camillo along. A short time later, Perdita's family is tricked into boarding Florizel and Perdita's ship. In Sicily, Florizel and Perdita visit Leontes, but then Polixenes and Camillo show up, having caught Perdita's father and brother. Everyone important meets them, and the shepherd reveals that Perdita is adopted and shows off the jewels she was found with. Leontes recognizes them as the jewels his baby daughter had. Perdita, he realizes, is his lost daughter. Paulina then invites everyone to her house in the country to see a statue she has had made of Hermione. As Leontes and Perdita gaze at the figure, Paulina tells them not to touch her and then offers to make the statue speak and move as if it were alive. The statue steps off the pedestal and starts talking. It isn't a statue at all, but the living, breathing Hermione, who Paulina has kept safe in her house for 16 years. The section from Act 3, Scene 2, is a pivotal moment in the plot. The well-spoken, honest, and wise Hermione rises to her own defense when she knows that her life and freedom depend on her ability to convince her husband of the truth. She defends herself with eloquence and grace, as Leontes tries to refute her words and grows more and more at a loss, finally just declaring everything lies and trying to convict her anyway. Hermione's speech is a turning point in the third act, the climax of the tragedy as Leontes grows frenzied in his jealousy, which is immediately followed by the deaths of his wife and son. a tragic close to the third act that brings with it the thematic renewal of life with the spring and summer setting of the last two acts. According to professional critiques, The Winter's Tale is centrally about the destructive nature of jealousy. As in many of his other works, Shakespeare focuses on the madness that jealousy causes. The force and conviction of Leontes' insane paranoia of his wife cheating on him lends the ability to sweep the audience up in his consuming fears. Shakespeare also leaves Hermione's appearance in the final scene ambiguous. Was it magical, or just a well-kept secret? While the hints in the text do imply that Hermione was simply spirited away to Paulina's country home to wait for 16 years, this is never made entirely clear. An unusual move from Shakespeare, who typically does not hesitate to be specific if fairies or gods are at work. Really though, The Winter's Tale is actually a lot like a soap opera. It features jealousy, attempted assassination, forbidden love, lost princesses, sudden and inexplicable resurrection, and people being eaten by bears. Some of the longer speeches are difficult to understand because iambic pentameter requires complex sentence structures and a lot of the language is dated and archaic, making it a struggle for the modern audience, like Shakespeare's other plays. The shift in tone after the third act is so dramatic the audience might feel like they're watching a completely different play. Because of that change in tone, this play is drastically different than most of Shakespeare's works, which settle on one tone and stick to it for the duration of the play. The Winter's Tale also resembles Othello in its theme of mistaken infidelity, and Romeo and Juliet in its forbidden romance between Florizel and Perdita. The greatest difference is that those themes have in them the element of hope and resurrection, rather than ending on a harsh note. For those who prefer happy endings, The Winter's Tale is the perfect choice.